Hello! Welcome to the Fleet Editor. This is not a 3K 4v4. Team 1 is not ANS. Team 2 is not OSP. We're not even on the trusting branch. We're live. And that means the starter fleets have been updated. And all of them are pretty strong and effective now. And that means I am doing a starter fleet tutorial. This is the very first installment of a new series that is going to cover all of these starter fleets and explain what they are, why they work, how to play them, demonstrate how to play them, and then close out with some thoughts on what we learned and how to tweak them in the Fleet Editor. So in this first episode here, I'll be going over TF Oak, the most basic of basic, the most straightforward of straightforward, but don't let that deceive you. There's some clever fleet building that went on here to make these as effective as they are. They're a generalist, 450 Axfords. You can perform fine in these, just kind of flying them forward and shooting people. But to really excel with these, and therefore to learn how to adapt this sort of fleet archetype into your own wheelhouse, you got to understand what's going on behind the scenes. So we're going to get into that now. As stated, 450 Axfords, their offensive capabilities are big anti-capital weapons, the 450mm shell. They can fire HE and AP. Both of them have that capability, and both of them have the guns for that. And both of them only have that sort of offensive armament. They have several ammo elevators to increase the reload rate, so they can dump out a ton of firepower in a relatively reasonable time frame. The high explosive is to be fired at, well, let's do it backwards actually. The armor piercing is to be fired at Ocellos and monitors, or flatheads as they are now called. These have higher armor piercing capabilities, but they do less raw damage. Whereas the high explosive is the opposite. It has less armor piercing capability and does more damage. So on the lower armored targets of the OSP, you want the HE rounds. And sometimes you might want to swap the AP to punch out components, because everything in this game is simulated, including the damage. High explosive shells, if they penetrate the armor of a vessel, will go into the ship, go a distance dependent on their penetration, and explode. They cast a sphere, and everything in that sphere takes an equal chunk of the damage. So if, like, there was a 100 damage shell, came in here, it burst, and the sphere hit all three of these compartments, each compartment would take 33 damage. That's a quick and dirty explanation of the damage mechanics there. Whereas armor piercing will, if it over-penetrates a hull, that is, it flies in one side and out the other, it'll do less damage. One, anything that over-penetrates does less damage, and that's why you want to use high explosive on a lot of the OSP hulls, because the armor piercing will often over-penetrate. If it does over-penetrate, it'll deal damage spread equally through every compartment that it goes through. If it does not over-penetrate and terminates inside the hull, it'll dump all of its damage into whichever compartment it terminated in. So if a armor-piercing round came in here and punched through these and then stopped here, it would dump all of its damage here and ignore these. But if it punched through these and then went out, it would do even damage to all these on its path. So there you go. And there's some more information up on the wiki for if you really want to dig into the damage mechanics. We're not going to do that here. Focusing mostly on the vessels themselves. So use high explosive. So for the 450 rounds of Oak, you want to use high explosive on anything other than an Ocello that is bow tanking. Sometimes you want to use high explosive on an Ocello if you've got it in the flank. And and flatheads monitors. Sometimes you want to use armor piercing on those. It depends on angle, but it's usually safer to use AP on them. And that's why this has, I think, about 3 times the amount of HE rounds as it does AP rounds. You can actually go down here and check. Yeah, about 3 times as much. So I've got some pretty mean offensive tools. Defensively, they're pretty mean as well. Got defenders, stone walls, and Moral Failing has a little bit of soft kill. So these are very capable against missiles. The defenders fire slugs in a stream. These are Sea-Wiz, and they're highly effective against torpedoes, against containers, and against small volumes of size 2 missiles. Especially if these missiles don't have terminal maneuvers, because the terminal maneuvers will make them dodge, and if they're not dodging, they're just gonna eat a bazillion damage per second and die. The Stonewall throws flak, which explodes, and it's good at dealing with large volumes of missiles and also clearing decoys. Now, when both these ships are together and their point defense networks overlap, it's extremely hard to hit missiles on them, period. But if you ever have an absolutely overwhelming barrage of missiles coming your way and you can soft kill them, Moral Failing has a little bit of soft kill too. You can dump chaff or active decoys, and the missiles with the proper seeker heads will chase after those. In addition to the anti-missile tools, these are built to be pretty tanky to direct fire. So they've got reinforced components in the nose, and then they've got some really important stuff down here in this safe spot on the Axford. It's this rarely gets hit. This basically never gets hit, and then this right here is also in the uncommon to rare levels of getting hit, just because of the geometry of the hull, and there's a bunch of factors into why that is. We don't need to get into that. The important thing to know is that this is a fairly safe position on the Axford. There's a lot of important stuff in here. There's a bulk magazine, which is not survivable, but it can contain a lot of ammo, and this is how this thing is able to function without sacrificing these really big compartments and with very vulnerable bulk magazines. And also the Combat Information Center is down here in the safe spot, which keeps you from losing command of your vessel. If that's because it's pretty unlikely that's going to get taken out without the whole rest of the thing just being basically dead. In general, in capital ships, you want to put your nose at your opponent. I know it's got guns on the back, but this is for like if you're super far away, if you're max range and you're not getting shot at, you can fire everything. Or if you wind up in an awkward position, you can fire that rear gun. But in general, you want to keep your nose pointed at anything that's shooting at you. And the layout of the internals is designed to take advantage of that, and the hull itself is designed like that too. Most of the hulls on ANS and Nebulous benefit a lot defensively from pointing their nose at their target, because it will angle the armor, which causes rounds to deflect. It effectively increases your armor value on any given spot. And it'll also keep all the rounds that are fired at your ship concentrated up in the front of the vessel, where all this kind of tanky stuff is, and not letting it get back in and take out your power or take out your vulnerable buff modules or your extremely important bits down here. That's why these are designed the way that they are. And that's why you can see Axfords sometimes just survive forever if they have the right position, but die extremely fast if they don't. If you get caught in the side, you will take a lot of damage. There are a lot of flat surfaces, the angling isn't anywhere near as good, and you won't be able to take advantage of the shape. All your components are open to get ruined by heavy fire. So you always want to have your nose pointed at whatever's shooting at you. In addition to those beefy components we've talked about. Some of those beefy components are damage control lockers. That allows, actually, they are required for the vessel to repair. There's also a small workshop, which increases the repair speed. Where is it? There it is. Down there in the sneaky spot. And the Axford hull itself has a bonus max repair threshold. That means that, well, most vessels, they can only repair up to 10% of past their lowest, or above their lowest damage health percentage. I think that was explained sort of clunkily, but I think it comes through. The Axford can repair 25% of that. So normal vessels can only repair up to 100% if the lowest they've ever been is 90% on any given component. Axfords can repair up to 100% from 75%. So that means if this thing gets extremely heavily damaged, it can get to cover, repair up, and be in really good shape and ready to fight. And the damage control, plus the workshop, which buffs the damage control, plus the flat repair bonus, max repair bonus, makes these into some extremely survivable ships. And on top of the point defense preventing you from taking a huge dump of damage from missiles, very survivable. Now we've got a third category here, which is everything else. It's the utility. It's things that can be used offensively and defensively. Radars, engines, and fire control radars, which are their own thing. So first we're going to talk about engines. Both of these just have one radar in them, which makes your acceleration higher at the price of having a larger radar signature, which means you're easy to detect, which isn't a big deal for the Axfords because they're already so gigantic, it's pretty much impossible to hide them anyways. Unless you really know what you're doing. There's a way to do that, but we're not going to get into that. And it increases the flank damage of the thrusters that they take when at flank speed. That's where you push your thrusters for extra speed to go faster. It does damage your thrusters, and this makes it damage them more. But because of the max repair bonus of the Axford and the small workshop, that increases the repair speed and all the damage control lockers, so all the stuff that is used to keep the ship alive, it also benefits the engine setup because it'll keep those thrusters nice and healthy too, as long as the DC themes aren't too busy doing other things. That enables these vessels to fly on flank basically all the time, which means they can go quite quickly, and they can adapt to changing circumstances very fast. Ships in Nebulous are fairly sluggish. It takes time for them to change speed and change direction and get going somewhere else. And the Raider makes it take less time, so you can react more effectively to what's going on around you. And that's very powerful. It's an offensive and a defensive tool. You can chase something down or pounce on something that you might have been retreating from if it takes like a missile strike, for example. And you can also suddenly reverse in case you come around the corner and see something you really don't want to fight. Which can happen if you're not careful. And it is not fun. You usually die painfully, but the Raider makes the dying a little less likely. We've also got two separate radars. Value Judgment has a spyglass, which is a spotting and detection radar. It has long range. It has good sensitivity, which means it's able to pick up ships very effectively, especially small ships. And it's also got an extra buff module here, the Adaptive Radar Receiver, which increases those spotting capabilities. You only ever want to bring one of these. You don't really get much benefit. You don't really get hardly any benefit at all beyond one. So if you're trying to increase your spotting capability, just bring one of these. And that makes Value Judgment a really effective spotting vessel. And the Moral Failing has a parallax. So the problem with the spyglass is it's extremely vulnerable to jamming. Just straight up. It's very vulnerable to jamming, and it can't generate fireable tracks. The bullseye on each ship allows you to lock things at long range, which gives you extremely good accuracy. So that overcomes the accuracy problem with the spyglass. The parallax is much more accurate, one, but it can also burn through jamming, and it's just a little resistant to jamming on its own due to how stats work. Radar is very complicated. There's more information for that on the wiki if you want it. I don't really understand it. I know how to use it, and that's the perspective we're going to take on these going forward. The parallax has something called right here, can sweep, a burn-through sweep, which allows you to generate pings off the back of heavy jamming. So you can see just for an instant where something is. You combine this with the bullseye lock, which is called a burn and lock. And you can hold blocks sometimes on vessels through jamming. And even if you can't hold blocks for long, you'll be able to get them for a bit and either force whatever's jamming you to go away to maybe jam something else, or maybe you can disrupt it, deal some good damage with a couple of volleys of that 450 HE. Who knows? It opens up a lot of ways to engage your targets. You can engage at extremely long range with a spyglass, or you can be an anti-jam delivery device up close. There's a lot of things you can do with these ships. As fire control radar, you pretty much always want to lock whatever you're firing at, and you don't want to fire at pure spyglass tracks. If you have a little track that's bouncing all over the place on the menu, do not fire at that. You will not hit anything. And the bullseyes help with that. But the bullseyes can also be used defensively. If you're playing against someone smart, so when you get locked, a little notification pops up on your HUD, and usually a voice call out comes out with it, some sort of, hey, we're locked. And that's important to know, because usually, shortly after you become locked, you take a ton of damage because everything shoots at you. So something you can do to scare people away, even if it may not be something you want to fight, if you just start throwing locks out, you might be able to convince something to go away. That only really works on smarter players who are aware of their UI and aware of their surroundings, so it's not going to work all the time. But it's something to keep in mind as a hey, I might be able to kill you. You probably should leave. It's a nice little way to threaten someone. And that has power. So we've gone over all the capabilities of these ships, but what do you actually do with them? I'm going to get into the specifics of that in following videos. I have 3 example games planned to show you how to use them and how not to use them, and I go over that there. But we can discuss it a little bit here too. So what you want to do with these vessels is be adaptive. As unhelpful as that may be, these are generalist ships. They can kind of do anything. They're what I would call midline. They can get in close, they can fight, but they also have the capabilities to stay back away from the fight and spot and be sensor ships for their team, thanks to the spyglass and the bullseye. And with the rear turret, you broadside, and you can dump a lot of damage down the field at maximum range where no one else can shoot at you. You can, as stated, you can play kind of close. You can put nose to target. You can take lots of hits and try to keep your team safe by zoning out other threats with the sheer awesome firepower of your 450 guns. And you can also cover your allies with your missile defensives. You can follow someone in that has kind of a risky build and protect them. There's a lot of things you can do with Oak. If got on the opposing team as a jam heavy build, you can get right up in their face and ignore the jamming entirely. There's so many options, so many ways to play. That's why this is such an effective new player friendly fleet, and this design that we've discussed here, this is why not every single double Axford build works. There's a lot of careful thought put into how these are made, and I hope understanding that helps you play them, one, but also helps you in the fleet editor on your own time. Because ultimately, the starter fleets exist for two purposes. One, so someone can just jump into the game and get a feel for what's going on before they try to tackle the fairly daunting fleet editor themselves, but also to inspire fleet archetypes, build ideas, say, hey, here's what you can do. Here's kind of a nice general thing. Now go take this idea and go nuts. We're going to be doing something like that in the last video. I hope this has been informational. I look forward to seeing you in future videos, and I look forward to seeing you in the battle space.